Ain al-Aqtab Siddiqui, great name, Siddiqui, which we share. And he's been invited here by the ASWJ. As I mentioned earlier, they are the sort of brains, if you like, behind initiating this event, and credit to them for doing that. So we're going to hear now from him. He has read law at undergraduate level, then completed legal practice course with masters. He's an expert and very well respected in both British and Islamic law, and it has provided evidence at all levels in all sorts of amazing places: County Court, Crown Court, High Court and the Court of Appeal, providing expert evidence on intricate areas of Islamic law. So without further ado, I'll hand over to our next speaker.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قال الله عز وجل في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد: يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم صدق الله مولانا العظيم. The verse of the Quran which I have recited, I will briefly translate and go on to what I wish to present to you in the short time window that I have been given. God in the Quran says, O people, irrespective of who you are, where you're from, O people, I created you from one man and one woman. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا, and I distributed you amongst different races and nations and tribes. لِتَعَارَفُوا, for one reason and one reason only, so that you may recognize each other. But إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ, the most noble of you are those who are God conscious. In the world in which we live today, a new God has now been born, and this God is an unprecedented God. And the name of this God is called the human mind. In certain strands and circles, you will find the presence of this God in a very arrogant form. The human mind has evolved and developed, allowed itself to see the potential that it has within it. And in that process, it assumes that it is invincible. It assumes that it has the ability to encapsulate the magnitude of this universe. But of course, as the human mind develops, it realizes that in itself, through its own faculties, it cannot encapsulate the universe, and hence the need for technology. And as technology advances, this human mind tries to intellectualize what it sees, and then formulates thinking based upon such perceptions. Now, on the face of it, there's nothing wrong with that. Yesterday, something was socially acceptable in England. Today, it no longer remains acceptable because the human mind has evolved. It has developed. And whilst there's nothing wrong with the evolution of the human mind and development, it has produced many commendable results. But this arrogance that it has also brought with it, that now we don't need religion, has resulted in this mind now becoming our master rather than our slave. And it's very important to know that whatever it is, this human mind, it is a product, and someone somewhere has manufactured it. It would be diabolical and stupid for someone to say that this bottle just emerged, evolved out of nature. Someone somewhere put it through a certain process, and you would be offending that person even though you don't know who actually made this bottle. Well, actually you do, you can find out. But the reality is, it would be stupid to say that, well, this just evolved. Someone somewhere who has the know-how, developed this bottle, and within it gave water. Likewise, our mind may not be able to intellectualize or encapsulate the manufacturer of this universe, but there is a manufacturer. That manufacturer created us, as far as the Quran is concerned, because He wanted man to realize who he was, what his reality was, so that through an understanding of his reality, he could understand the reality of his manufacturer. Being created in God's image is a theme that is quite prevalent in all the Abrahamic faiths, and that's why when the manufacturer looks at all the different products in this universe and compares and evaluates each and every one, he says, certainly in the Quran, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. The human being is the best of creation. So the question that begs to be asked is, what is it within this human that makes him the best? Clearly, if you compare the human to the animal kingdom or to the metaphysical kingdom that science hasn't yet discovered or is trying to discover, there are many facets that overbear the reality of that creation over the human being. So what is it? Unfortunately for us, as humans, we've reduced our existence to this piece of meat, which consists of an age limit, which has a start date and a sell-by date. We have no control over when it starts, we have no control over when it ends. We don't know when it's going to end, how it's going to end. We don't know who we are, where we come from, what we're doing here. None of us chose and designed our faces. None of us chose where we're going to be born, what we're going to do, what our vocation is. A lot of these decisions were made by someone, somewhere. Who? Why? Why did he put all this in front of me? Why am I having all the problems that I'm having? Is religion really the answer? So the human mind that is now in certain strands of human thinking believes it has all the answers. But unfortunately, you see that this new God that has emerged isn't stable. One day it says one thing, and another day it says another. And the justification for such shift is, well, we're developing. It's a change. But we need to stand back and think, is there an alternative to this new regime where everything is dictated by the intellectual human mind? Well, religion certainly comes into the arena and says, listen, the human mind is just a facet of your creation. There is more aspects of your creation that you haven't yet discovered, which you, in your scientific pursuits, simply cannot understand. For example, the starting point and finishing point of science in its empirical reality is the five senses. I know this is hard because I can touch it. I know it's pleasant because I can smell it. I know because I can see the five senses. And then there's the intellect. 1 + 1 = 2, not because I saw it, but because I was able to intellectualize it. So that's the beginning and the end of science. But if you look at the scriptures, Abrahamic scriptures generally, but from my perspective, the Quran in particular, these are only two sources of knowledge. There are more sources of knowledge that remain unexplored. Let me give you an example. Where you have external five senses, you have internal five senses. Today I see people who I've never seen, and I close my eyes, I can concoct your image in my mind. But if I've never seen you, how am I going to be able to concoct your image in my mind? Science doesn't have any answers to that. Religion does. The Quran does. The Sunnah does. Today you have a dead body in front of you. You bring the best doctors in the world and say, here you are resurrected. Bring life back into it. They can't. They say, well, there's no soul in it. Well, what does science have to do with souls? What does science know about souls? Nothing. But when Jesus says to a dead body, Qum bi-iznillah, stand, that dead body stands. What's going on? There's a science beyond the science that we understand. Likewise, we have an intellect which is the product of this mind, but there is another intellect that we have, which is the product of this heart. Of course, the only facet of that we understand is love. And the only prototype of love we have before us is that given to us by Hollywood, Bollywood or Lollywood, whichever would you subscribe to. The point is that this intellectual mind has a lot more to offer. The concept of this is just a processor, a calculator. When you're sitting and suddenly an idea comes to you, where did that idea come from? Who gave you that idea? Last night you saw in your dream that something was going to happen. Something happens. How is that possible? Science has no answers. And I'm not referring to some religious theologian or some prophet or some saint. I'm talking about people like Edgar Cayce. How does science explain Edgar Cayce? And I'm not talking about Mother Shipley. I'm talking about a person who's been forensically analyzed by the CIA. And the CIA have created an institute of Edgar Cayce only because they're fascinated by the fact that this illiterate person goes to sleep at night, wakes up in the morning and gives elaborate scientific answers to which even scientists are baffled about. Science doesn't have any answers to that. The point I'm trying to make is that the ambit of science is limited to the human mind, but what religion offers is a more broader spectrum. And therefore, whilst you have an internal intellect housed in the mind, the Quran also talks about an internal intellect housed in the heart. And then finally, the final source of knowledge is revelation. Revelation is a facet of our existence that we simply don't understand. We all, to a lesser or greater degree, are recipients of revelation. Of course, at the higher end of the spectrum, you have prophets who have accurate, legal, certain revelation. And at the lower end of the spectrum, you have people who are subject to revelation from satanic sources, as the Quran says, and even other religions talk about, which are inspired by Satan, but it's nevertheless revelation. How do we distinguish? We simply haven't given religion the time. We treat religion as a set of rituals, practice it as a cult, and simply don't give it the thought of day. But if we realize what religion actually had to offer a modern society, we would realize that what modern secular society is failing to deliver to the modern man, there religion comes to the rescue. Let me give you one or two examples, and just the problem with lawyers is they don't know when to end.
I can see that.
So let me just give you one example in this respect. The modern state thinks that man, and it's based on the thinking that man in a state of nature is a beast, and when he comes to civil society, Thomas Hobbes, when he comes to civil society, needs to forego certain civil liberties, in return for which the state will guarantee certain liberties, civil liberties, grant him freedom, and grant him prosperity, health, wealth, blah, blah, blah. So the modern secular society gives man the freedom to do, and certain basic safeguards, and it feels that given those safeguards, man can prosper. But if you look at the fabric of the modern man and how content and happy he is today, and if you look at the man 100 years ago, there's a huge difference. The modern man is far more regulated than the man 100 years ago. The modern man needs to turn to argument and to the court far more frequently than the man 100 years ago. Why is it that the corpus of law is ever so becoming more and more, and man is becoming more and more regulated, yet hundreds of years ago there wasn't as much law? The answer simply is that religion says, listen, whether that traffic light, whether that camera on the traffic light is working or not, doesn't matter. Don't apply your intellect. That if that camera is working, I will abide by the law. But if the camera isn't working, I'll look left and right and I'll just go. Who knows? Who cares? No one knows. No harm done. But religion says, listen, it doesn't matter if the camera is not working. There is someone looking at you, and he will hold you to account for what you do. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, a day will come. So construct your life not out of fear of the state, not out of fear of being caught out, not out of fear of what your peer pressure or your social pressure will deliver to you. Construct your life on principles that your manufacturer who created you has given you certain goals, certain ideals to look up to subscribe to work towards, and idealize, and he will hold you to account one day for them. وَمَا عَلَيْنَا إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ.
Thank you very much for that. Now we're moving swiftly on to the next contributor, who is Dr. Damien Howard, who's been invited here by the Catholic Society. So Dr. Damien is a Jesuit priest, a lecturer in theology at Haythrop College, which is part of the University of